guys, Matt Allen here. Welcome back to TacticalBassin. Today we are talking about jigs, jig head styles, what they are all for. There are an incredible number of jigs on the market. They're all different. They all have different purposes, and you need to understand what those are for. So today we're going to run through about 10 different styles of jigs, explain what they're for and how to use them. Now first, we are still evacuated. We got evacuated about a week ago. I just want to give you guys a quick update. So we actually came over here to the coast to get our families out of the smoke. So that's why you don't recognize the background here. That's why we're not on the water. But we're going to try and head back home for the first time, hopefully this afternoon. So far, so good. We all still have houses. This fire has exploded, though. It's probably going to be the biggest fire in California history when this is all over. If you guys have not been following along and you want to check it out, it's called the Mendocino Complex Fire, and it is massive. But that's why we're not at home. That's why we're not out on the water. But hopefully we'll be back to it soon. But in the meantime, let's talk jigs. Let's start with finesse, and then we'll work our way all the way to those heavy jigs. The very first one we're going to talk about is a true finesse jig, a ball head style jig. What is this style of jig for? When do you use it? Why do you use it? Pretty simple. The finesse jig, to me, is going to be that crossover bait. Meaning I'm not really on a jig bite. I'm on a numbers bite. Maybe I'm fishing docks. Maybe I'm fishing, flipping pilings. Maybe I'm fishing rock edges. It's summertime. The fish are up on those rocky outcrops. And I'm on a good worm bite, or I'm on a good Texas rig bite, but I want to catch a bigger fish. That's when I turn to that finesse jig. It's a finesse cut jig, ball head, and that ball allows it to come through cover very well. The ball head itself, I don't know, I don't feel like it really shines at anything, but it does everything well. It doesn't really keep the jig standing upright, but the trailer, if you use the right trailer, will do that for you. But it does come through cover extremely well because there's just nothing to catch on. This style of jig, they're small, they're compact, they have a fairly small hook, so you can throw it on lighter line. And that's why this is the transitional bait. So if you're catching a lot of wormfish, a lot of Texas rig fish, and you need a bigger bite, that's when you turn to a true finesse jig. And guys, like every video, we're going to link everything down in the video description for you. We'll link you to each one of these products so you don't have to write down what they are or try and remember because there's going to be a bunch of them. But the finesse jig, I'll typically pair it up with a similar trailer, something small, something compact. Either a Rage Menace, the small Menace, or like a Slim Packa. And even the Slim Packa, I'll bite them down a little bit. So take about a ½ inch off the end of that. And I'm not going to rig trailers for all these, but I will this one just to show you how good that can look. And you just thread this guy on there. And you end up with such a perfect little compact jig. Because jigs tend to get bigger bites than other baits. They tend to get less bites, but bigger bites. And when you go down to a finesse jig, how good does that little guy look? Oh, it looks awesome. When you go to a jig, like I said, you get less bites, but you tend to get more bites. But when you go to the finesse jig, it's like a perfect compromise. You still get a lot of bites because it's a smaller profile. But when you come across a big one, whatever it is about that jig, that secondary movement where they come down to look at it and that skirt is moving, the craw is sitting there, right? You're seeing the trailer. In the water, this whole skirt puffs up. So they're seeing the trailer itself. They're seeing the craw. But then you have all these appendages that are moving, especially if a big fish comes up on that bait. Because when a big fish comes in, they move a wall of water. And it will make that skirt move. And that's that secondary action. That's what the real thing has. A crawdad, it's got antennas. It's got little legs working. Fish have that glow on the side of them where their scales are shimmering, their fins are flickering. Those are the things that are hard to imitate, but a jig skirt does a really good job of that when it's just free floating in the water around that trailer. That's why you tend to get bigger bites. But in a small compact size, does a fantastic job of it. Now, two more that are going to play in that category. One is a football head. And typically, a football is considered a finesse type jig. Typically a colder water bait. I like to use a football in two circumstances. I like it on a heavy mud bottom. If you're on one of those lakes that just has nothing down there, especially in the wintertime where the grass dies back and you're left with just bare mud, that football, that wide profile head, you can pull it. You don't hop it. Pull it on the bottom, and you can actually dig that mud, and it will puff the mud. Every time you pull it, it'll puff up mud. And if you've ever seen it in shallow water, I mean, it literally leaves a mud trail on the bottom. It's amazing, and the fish can follow that. It's very good for that. The other thing I really like about a football jig is that it is so wide that it gets hung up on everything. Now, that sounds like a bad thing, right? But not necessarily. Here's the advantage. A bait that's just coming along the bottom doing nothing doesn't always catch the fish's attention. But a bait that's getting hung up and pops loose and hangs up and pops loose, it gets their attention. They'll come in and look at that. That football head, because it has such a flat face, if you're in chunk rock, can be amazing. Now, in big, heavy boulders, you're usually in trouble because it really is getting hung up and it's getting stuck and you end up losing them. But in small rock, you can pull it in there and get it hung up, and then if you pop it, it'll jump up out of there. And then get it stuck, and you can shake it in place and then pop it loose and it'll come up out of there. And they eat it aggressively. It's great for triggering bites when other baits won't do that. It's a really, really good option. So that's the football jig. Now, they make football jigs like this guy here with heavy wire hooks. And that is a bait that we turn to in the summertime. So they make it in both a finesse and a heavy wire. And guys, like I said, I'll link them all. Every single one of these jigs that I'm talking about is a dirty jig. That's what Tim and I use the most. But we use all sorts of things. But the information is going to apply to every single jig from every single brand. So it doesn't matter what you use or what your preference is. If it's different than our preference, this information is going to help you. So this is that heavier wire skirted football jig. Same exact concept, getting it stuck, popping it loose, but you can do it in the summertime because you've got that beefier, stronger hook that's going to hold up. The reason why it matters is that in the wintertime, the bass get lethargic, the water's cold, and they literally cannot pull as hard. They are weaker in that colder water. In the summertime, that same fish has got a lot more power. That's when you want that heavier hook to do the exact same thing. Now, one last thing about the football before I move on. The fact that it deflects, that's the reason that whole swing head, biffle head, that whole concept even took place. And that's why companies all went to a football head. Because that, we talked about this, a month ago? About how it'll come through and just bang through the rocks and you reel it quickly along the bottom and you just let it bounce through everything. That's why there's a football head on that. It's the exact same concept. But the football jig is just going slower and actually hanging up and getting popped free. The next one in that finesse category is going to be casting jigs. Casting jigs are going to look a lot like their heavy wire friends. So this is kind of a Pitchin style, Archie style head, a rounded head, but not a true round ball. More of an Archie style. But then they pair it up with a fairly light wire hook. I mean, compare that to an actual finesse jig, very, very similar hook. So a light wire hook, but in an all-around head design. See, this Archie style head is personally, it's my favorite head because it's the do everything, works well for everything. It's not the best in grass. It's not the best in heavy toolies, but it comes through wood extremely well, comes through rock extremely well, and it will come through grass. May not be the best, but it does come through it. Also comes through mud bottom really well, chunk rock bottom really well. It is that universal do everything head design. If you're only going to have one jig, that Pitchin style, Archie style head is the way to go. Now with that little casting hook in it, see, that's an O'Shaughnessy style hook. So it's a unique bend, lighter wire. I can get away with throwing this all the way down. I'll bet I could set that with 10-pound line. Now I prefer to throw it on 12-pound, but I'll bet I could set it on 10. And that's braid to leader. I mean, you could definitely set it on 12 or 15-pound fluorocarbon, no problem. But I prefer braid to leader, and that opens up a lot of doors for you, because now you're getting that jig profile, that full skirt. You know, pair it up with like a beaver style bait, or just a true trailer like a Rage chunk or a Paca chunk, any of those heavy chunk style baits, and you have a full profiled bait. It's large, it will get monster bites, but because you're fishing that lighter hook, you can get away with throwing it on lighter line, which equals more bites. Now, the downside, of course, is hooking a giant and getting bent out. That is why we transition to the true Pitchin Jig. The Pitchin Jig, almost the identical head style. It's that Archie style head. This is my #1 jig. So the casting jig with that style head, and then you switch over to the Pitchin Jig, which is that exact same head style, but now you're talking about a full 4/0 or 5/0 round bend heavy wire hook. That is my most universal jig. That's the jig that I throw 12 months out of the year. It just works. Now, if I get into a situation where that water's gotten clear, because I need at least 15 pound to set this hook, and a lot of times I'm throwing it on 17 or 20. So if that water gets really, really clear, that's when I go, I've got a problem here. Cut this off, switch to that casting jig, get that lighter hook, lighter line, get more bites. But if I'm getting into big fish or I'm in cover, immediately I go to that Pitchin Jig, the most universal option. And that guy, you know, it's a bigger bait, so you don't have to trim that skirt. Get a beaver style bait. I take the first couple of ribs off the top of any beaver style bait to make it a little more compact. Thread that guy on there. Pop through. And now you have a full profiled, awesome craw bait. I mean, it looks so good. That's an all day, every lake profile right there. They just flat catch them. If you want to get into jigs with one head style, it's an Archie style head. And if you want to catch big ones, it's a Pitchin Jig. And you can branch out from there. But that's, in my opinion, that's the core of jig fishing. Now, let's go even heavier. Even heavier, you're going to go to a Flippin style head. What is a Flippin style head? Well, Flippin style head is going to be a head that is pointed. See that point? The purpose of a Flippin style head is that it's a wedge. So it pushes its way through cover. So will it do well in wood? You can get it through wood. If there's a V in a branch and you bring this style in, it's going to come in, it's a wedge. It's going to catch in that V and it's going to get stuck. But if you shake it, you could probably get it over. Whereas a Pitchin style head with that big bulbous face on it, it'll come in and just push its way up and through that V. There's no wedge. Does that make sense? But grass, completely different scenario. Grass is usually stranded and it's vertical. And that wedge style head, that little nose gets in there and starts pushing it open, and it makes room for that jig to come right through. Hands down, the best style head for grass, tules, cane, slop, any of that stuff is going to be a Flippin style head. Any heavy cover application, that's the way you want to go. This is the Scott Canterbury head, so it's got literally the exact same hook as the Pitchin Jig. It's that good for everything, does it all hook, where you need, 15 to 20 pound line to set it. Then this is also offered in a no jack hook which is just a gaff of a hook. You know, we've been throwing that thing for well over a decade. That no jack hook, originally a saltwater hook. I mean, it is strong. If you're catching big ones, if you know you're going out to catch big ones, if you're flipping shallow cover, trying to get those monster bites, that's the one. You throw a no jack. If you're not doing that, you can throw that Canterbury with that 4/0, 5/0 heavy wire, and it's golden. The last category to talk about is swim jigs. Swim jigs come in two styles. And I'm still going to talk to you guys a little bit more about trailers and colors here in a second. But let's jump over to swim jigs. Swim jigs, you've got this style, which is a pointed head style swim jig. Okay? That's your best all-around head, no question. It's a V, cuts cover really well, comes through grass great. Just an all-around fantastic bait. Comes with a heavy wire hook. They also make a finesse version of it. But the benefit of a swim jig, going back to where this video started, secondary action. So you could throw a swim bait on a swim bait head, which we do a ton. You know, put a Kitech on a Matt Allen swim bait head, you crush them. But if you get into a situation where the fish want a bigger profile, typically fish that are eating bluegills. If they target bluegills are tall, they're a big profile. You switch over to a swim jig because that skirt will puff up in the water, and you could put a Kitech on the back of this. It'll stick out here a little ways. You could put a handful of baits on the back of this. Rubble Worm Easy Shad is one that we've thrown forever. Your bait is a small profile bait, but then the skirt puffs up around it, and it creates that bigger, rounder, full profile, much better imitator of those larger bait fish. Plus, it's moving. It's secondary movement. It's that true realism that you want to see, that the fish want to see when they're coming in to take a shot. And then the best thing of all, the reason why I actually prefer a swim jig in most circumstances to an actual bluegill swim bait is that when they come in to eat it, it's all skirt. They come in on a big swim bait and they go to T-bone it, there's a lot of bait there to try and get the hook. When they come in on this guy, if it's got an Easy Shad or a Kitech on it, and they come in and it's this big wide profile, it all collapses and they're just left with a big old hook. It's perfect. So great hookup to land ratio. The other style swim jig is this guy, California Swim Jig. This is a bait that we designed 12 years ago, give or take. It's been a long time. Before the swim jig had made a big push, before it had gone west at all, the owner of Dirty Jigs was talking to me about swim jigs. I'll give you just the very brief version of this. There were only two styles of swim jig on the market. There literally was not a heavy wire hook on the entire market. It didn't exist. You had Coosa River swim jigs, which were medium wire, and then you had Northern swim jigs, which were your finesse guys. That's what was on the market. That's all that existed. And Kurt talked to me for, I don't know, a year and a half about throwing swim jigs, and I wasn't buying it. He finally talked me into trying it. I went out and threw them, and man, it worked. First off, it worked. I was on the California Delta. I got a bunch of fish that first day, but I started bending hooks out. Bent the finesse hooks like they were nothing. Bent the Coosa style hooks pretty regularly. So he and I talked. I said, man, you need a California style jig. I mean, we need a big bass jig. That's where the California Swim Jig came from. So it's actually a flippin style head. It's not that narrow head. So it doesn't come through grass as well as the standard swim jig. The standard swim jig comes through just a little bit better. But the profile, that head profile works. They eat it. It's got big eyes on it. Natural profile. When that skirt puffs up behind it, it looks good. And then you've got that monster no jack hook. I don't care if you're fishing in saltwater, you're not bending that hook out. That thing is amazing. That was the first heavy wire swim jig to ever hit the market. It literally created its own category. And now there's tons of heavy wire swim jigs on the market, but that was the first one. That's what we were catching all those monster bass on. That's a little bit of history on swim jigs. Now, The one thing I want to touch on here at the end is color, because this is going to save you guys some headaches. And we've talked about this in previous videos. But when you take your jig and you go to pair your trailer, well, first let's talk about the jigs. What colors do you need? I'm going to try and keep it simple for you. You know, there are, I don't know, 50, 100, 150 jig colors out there. If you've got something in that green pumpkin realm, you've got something in that black blue, and then you've got something with a brown base. That one's Supermat Brown, that's my color. Something brown, something green pumpkin, something black and blue. You're in good shape. You know, I own a lot of jigs because I'm passionate about them. You might be surprised to know I own a lot more jigs than I do swim baits. I love jig fishing because they catch giant fish all over the country year round. They always work. And a lot of people struggle with jig fishing, but it's one of those things where you just have to catch the first one. You need to get it out of your head. It's a bigger thing in your mind than it is in reality. Catching them is not hard. There are times when the jig bite isn't on, but it's rare. There's almost always a jig bite. And sometimes the jig bite is out of this world. I mean, just so good, it would make you sick to find out you were missing it. But you can get too complicated. So I actually use 4 color schemes, but 3 of them are my main color. My first one, no question, is something in that green pumpkin. That color is called Go-To. This color is called Green Pumpkin Craw. Something green pumpkin. My number 2, again, is that brown base, Supermat Brown. It's brown purple. And most of the country shies away from brown jigs. And I think they're out of their minds, because every time I talk somebody into trying one, it works on their water, lo and behold. A brown jig is definitely my number 2. My number 3 is something in that black blue. We all know it works. Fish all over the country eat black blue. Big fish eat black blue. Coast to coast. Number 4 is going to be something in a red profile. But those first 3 are probably 95% of my jig fishing. Every once in a while, when the bite's either really aggressive, I'll turn to a bright red jig, and they'll eat it even harder. Because red is a triggering color for bass. I'm not going to go into why or speculate, but it is. If they're cool, if they're calm, if they don't want to feed, it's really hard to get them to eat red. But if they're revved up, where you're throwing out there and getting bit on every couple casts, sometimes red will start getting bit on every cast. They just start smashing it. 2, in the dead of summer on one of my fisheries, my crawdads turn like a cherry color, a really, really bright red, and it shines for that application. So that's my 4th color. But I really keep it that simple. Now, you may live in an area of the country where you say, no, man, watermelon works so much better than green pumpkin. Well, if that's your experience, if you're Texas rigging with a plastic and watermelon works better than green pumpkin, then for you, delete that and sub in a watermelon color. And you'll do just fine. You know, something like that guy. I think that's watermelon magic, but I could be wrong. There's so many colors with so many names. But just fill those basic categories. Then when you want to mix it up, here's the trick. See how well those match? That's green pumpkin craw with a green pumpkin trailer. Well, look how well these don't match. And look how good it still looks. That's brown purple with a watermelon trailer. But you see how natural that still looks in the hand? I mean, it looks good. And it looks good to the fish. They eat it. You're out there on a bite and your water starts getting murky and all you've got is a watermelon jig. Well, you got that murky water. You need a better profile. Black blue. Put that black blue on your watermelon jig and see what happens. All of a sudden, you've got a bold profile. You've got a dark profile in the water. But the secondary movement, it's all watermelon. And in that murky water, it's hard for them to see it, but they can still feel it. So when they come in, they're still feeling that large profile, but they're seeing that dark black blue. Don't be afraid to mix colors. Don't be afraid to use a light jig and a dark trailer, or a dark jig and a light trailer. You see people all the time take dip and die and dip their little tail chartreuse. So they're willing to have chartreuse on a natural jig. Why are they not willing to put black blue on a natural jig? Try it. You're going to love it. Get you a handful of jig colors, handful of trailer colors, so you can mix and match. You're going to save money. You're going to catch more fish, and you're going to be way more adaptable. Down in the video description, again, we'll link all the gear. I'm also going to link you 3 or 4 of my favorite trailer baits because I keep that just as simple, and we barely touched on them here. Guys, I hope this video helps you. It was long, but jig fishing is probably the core of bass fishing. It works all over the country. It works 12 months out of the year. Catches little fish, but it catches monster fish. If you need to hone one skill to start catching big ones consistently, it's jig fishing. Guys, we appreciate you. Hopefully we'll be back home either tonight or later this week, and we can get back on the water and get back to normal life. But thank you for continuing to support the channel. We appreciate you guys. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, turn on those notifications so you know when the new videos are coming, and we'll talk to you soon.